Hey there, welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, where we're expanding the natural family planning conversation. I'm your host, Ellen Holloway. Welcome back to Charting Toward Intimacy. We're going to be talking about why it is that the church teaches NFP for family planning. We're going to start with the base need for family planning, and then we're going to jump into a bit about why NFP and not some form of contraception. So that need for family planning, it wasn't always so. Let's jump back 200 years ago. There wasn't a need for family planning. Families largely lived on farms and homesteads. There was a need for lots of children to help with the work. There was also a much higher infant mortality rate, as morbid as that is. It wasn't always expected that children born would live to adulthood. And so as people moved to cities and cities got more crowded, living spaces got smaller. So if we think really just surface level practically, it's not as easy to have 4 children in a 1-bedroom apartment as a 3-bedroom farmhouse. And really we're also faced with the overall problem of modernity. So in some areas, cost of living is so high that it is actually impossible to live without 2 incomes. There just isn't enough money or resources or space to care for all the needs of more than a few children in many families. We are no longer working on family farms that provide much of our human needs. We don't have space, for the most part, to raise chickens or pigs. And if we have a vegetable garden, it's likely big enough to produce a garden salad a few times a year. And that's about it. And also, as medicine improved and infant mortality rates went down, the number of children living to adulthood obviously improved. There is an expectation today that every child born will live to adulthood. And that expectation didn't exist a few hundred years ago, and even 100 years ago. My grandfather was one of 18 births. One of his sisters was stillborn, and three other siblings didn't live to adulthood. And while the loss of a child was tragic, it was very common. This family also lived on a farm in Nebraska. Yes, they did not have a lot of extra money like many of us today, but their life provided for many of their needs. They grew corn to sell and eat. They raised chickens, cows, goats, pigs. They made their own butter, cheese, lard, etc. There was tons of farmland for the kids to run around and play on and not get in mom's way while she cooked in the teeny tiny kitchen. As the kids grew older, they helped with the farm work to bring in more money for the family or provide for their basic needs. That mom, my great-grandmother, didn't have a need for family planning. And in fact, she kind of needed the extra kids that a large family provided. On another side, families also lived closer together. There were grandparents and aunts and brothers and sisters and cousins to help with child rearing. People lived more in community. The saying, "it takes a village to raise a child," came from actual villages coming together to raise the collective children of all the families. Today, we live in cities. We live far away from family. We live in places that require 2 incomes. We live in small apartments. We work at very demanding jobs that wouldn't allow us time to raise children. We don't know our neighbors. Our children need to be picked up and dropped off from school and activities instead of being able to walk around town freely. We have societal and work-related pressures that cause real mental health problems. We know more about medicine and the female body. We can identify health issues that would cause serious issues if a woman were to get pregnant at a certain time. And these are just some ideas of reasons why, family planning does need to exist today. And there are so many more reasons, and many of these reasons wouldn't apply to you or to certain people. And I'll get into more about the serious reasons for spacing pregnancy in a little bit. But what I want to drill down in is that the church cares about us. God wants good things for us and doesn't want us to get hurt. And he shows us this in 2 distinct ways when it comes to family planning. First off, the church understands that there is a need for family planning. Hello, responsible parenthood. What does that mean, you ask? Well, that comes from Pope Paul VI in Humana Vitae. So I'm going to quote from there. With regard to the biological processes, responsible parenthood means an awareness of and respect for their proper functions, aka being aware of your fertility, or you might say fertility awareness. I quote again. With regards to man's innate drives and emotions, responsible parenthood means that man's reason and will must exert control over them, aka understanding the need to abstain at certain times and also understanding that your spouse is not a sex toy for you, rather someone that you can give the complete gift of yourself to and from whom you can accept their complete gift of self. I quote again. With regard to physical, economical, psychological, and social conditions, responsible parenthood is exercised by those who prudently and generously decide to have more children, and by those who, for serious reasons and with due respect to moral precepts, decide not to have additional children for either a certain or an indefinite period of time. All right, and there you have it right there, the case for family planning. I'm not going to get too nitty-gritty about serious reasons in this episode because I could talk for a long time about that. But I want to stress that the reason that there is no hard and fast list from the church is as to, what a serious reason to avoid pregnancy is because it would be vastly different for every couple. Let me give you a few examples. For one couple, finances could be a serious reason to avoid pregnancy because there is literally no extra money. For another couple, finances might seem like a reason to avoid, but it's actually a selfish want to not have to give up certain expenses and certain lifestyle for a child. So you can see how those two can be vastly different for two different couples, and yet they are the same exact issue. Also, the church could never draw a line in the sand on certain issues. Let's take a simple example that's not quite as touchy as money. So for one family, having an extra bedroom in their house means they're ready to have another child whenever. For another, that bedroom might be where their mother-in-law stays when she comes to relieve overworked parents from kid duty once a month. And giving up that bedroom for another child would mean she couldn't come and could therefore result in serious mental or marital issues down the road. And so until there is more space, that couple determines it's time to wait. But for yet another couple, they may be hiding behind that same idea of giving up a bedroom would mean the mother-in-law wouldn't stay. And yet, if asked, the mother-in-law would happily stay on the couch when she comes to visit. Again, that's a little bit more simplistic of an idea, but you can see how the exact same scenario can mean completely different things to different couples. So there's no way a list could be made for acceptable reasons to postpone a pregnancy. That is for discussion between you, your spouse, God, and maybe a spiritual director or your parish priest if you are really having trouble discerning. All right, so the second way God shows us that he truly cares about our well-being and health and doesn't want us to get hurt: contraception. The question always comes up from people who don't understand contraception. Why does the church allow NFP and not birth control? Isn't NFP just Catholic birth control? All right, let's break down that question. The answer actually depends on how you define birth control. So for the most part, our society defines birth control as any form of contraception, which, as we've already mentioned on this podcast, the church is fully against anything that is contraception or against conception. However, if you are defining birth control as something along the lines of family planning, then the church isn't necessarily against that. NFP is a form of family planning. So the distinction here is that the church accepts reasons for needing to plan a family and space births for a time or indefinitely, as quoted from Humana Vitae earlier. However, the church does not accept anything that is against conception or anything that blocks or makes conception unlikely or impossible. So therefore, things like condoms or a copper IUD that physically block conception, or the birth control that mess with a woman's hormones so much that it hinders conception and makes it extremely unlikely, those kinds of things are all condoned by the church because they are against conception. And while it is permissible to space pregnancy for a serious reason, it's not okay to mess with our God-designed bodies and fertility in order to control them and control the outcome of sex. Sex is for two things: babies and bonding. You take away one of those things, and then it's not sex. At least it's not what sex was intended to be. Sex being a beautiful spousal union that unites husband and wife and has the co-creative ability to create life out of love. On another side of why hormonal birth control specifically is not condoned by the church, like I said before, God cares about us and doesn't want bad things to happen to us. He doesn't want us to get hurt. Things like the pill or the patch or an injection or a hormonal IUD or any form of birth control that shoots like synthetic hormones into your system hurts it. Maybe not physically, like pain, but it hurts it. So we talk all the time in our culture about the need to eat well and put good things into our bodies. And then we as a culture pop pills every day that are a known carcinogen, and they're full of synthetic chemicals that are in no way good for us. And the church cares that these things are bad for us and doesn't want us to have to go through the pain and hurt and health issues that come from use of hormonal contraception. All right, so in summary, the church doesn't just teach NFP simply because it's harder than taking the pill or getting an implant. The church teaches NFP use because she cares about us. Learning to be aware of our biological processes from Humana Vitae and respecting that design brings us closer to our spouse and to God. It's also, as we've talked about before, important knowledge for a woman to have about her own roller coaster of hormones and how those affect her mood, energy, etc. The need to abstain when avoiding pregnancy helps us to learn to control our innate drives and emotions. Again, that's from Humana Vitae. And understand that our spouse is not just a sex toy for us. They are a gift, and we should respect that. Not just because we love our spouse, but because God loves our spouse. Hormonal birth control is super unhealthy, and God doesn't want that for us. We deserve to take care of our bodies. Breaking apart the unitive and procreative parts in sex ruin it. It's like separating the taste of food from its nutritional value. If you ate food only for the taste, you would be incredibly unhealthy. And if you ate a tasteless smoothie every day that had perfect nutrition, eating would become meaningless. And I think we can all look at our society and see places where sex has become meaningless. And to God, sex is one of the greatest things He created. It's the glory of heaven mixed with the unity of persons, mixed with the creative power of God. It's basically the coolest thing ever. So the next time someone asks you why the church doesn't get up with the times and accept birth control, or questions why NFP is allowed but not the pill or condoms, have a conversation about what contraception really means and what sex really means, and how the teaching of NFP actually shows us how much the church and God care for us. And on that note, we will finish the podcast for today. I do want to ask you again to please consider supporting me on Patreon. I love doing this work. I would love to be able to devote even more time to doing it. So please consider supporting me with a monthly pledge on Patreon, patreon.com/charting. Links to that are in the show notes. And there are some special perks for my patrons on Patreon. And if you're not already following the podcast on Instagram, find us at Charting Toward Intimacy. And please reach out if you have questions, comments, topic suggestions. I love to hear from you guys. All of those links are in the show notes. Until next time.